Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call our regularly scheduled meeting for August 28th, the El Dorado Irrigation District to order. Roll call, please, Jen.
Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Veerkamp, and Zenian, Day, present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Clerk to the Board Sullivan, present.
All right, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then a moment of silence. El Dorado Hills County Water District, AKA Fire Department, lost a 26-year member director over the weekend. Ready, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. We're ready to adopt the agenda. We have a motion for approval.
I'll move.
Okay, Lori, thank you. I'll second. Thank you, Director Dwyer. Do we have any comments or questions from the board? Anybody from the audience in the room? Seeing none. Jen, does anybody online want to comment or question on the adoption of the agenda?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is the time for any comments on the adoption of today's agenda. President Veerkamp does not appear. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak? I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote. My gadget's not working.
Neither is ours.
Well, ours aren't. I'm just-
Okay, hold on. Let's, no.
No, hang on.
Okay,
Okay.
I try it again?
everybody ready?
Yep, let's try it again. There we go.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. Communications, General Manager, Employee Recognition.
Good morning. I have two today. First, we received a call from a customer, Kimberly Brooks, to express her appreciation to Matt Keeler, distribution operator, who recently did a repair on her home. She said, "Matt was amazing and so helpful." And that's just one of many compliments we get from our distribution operator.
I just wanted to clarify, near her home, not
Yeah,
on her.
Excuse me.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you for the value added, Jennifer. And the second one is, last meeting, I introduced Aaron Kennedy, who took Tim Ransom's spot. Tim's last meeting's today, so I'd just like to recognize him one more time. He came to the district in February of 2009. He had a lot of big projects to work on, all that lovely VMware that we all use. The Hanson upgrade, cybersecurity, upgrading the old IT infrastructure, and the backup center down in El Dorado Hills, and many other accomplishments. He's going to be missed. Aaron's going to be a good replacement, but Tim, I just want to publicly recognize your efforts for the district, so thank you.
Tim, did you leave a trap door for yourself, or? Okay.
No, but I think he gave Aaron all the passwords. So, okay.
Well, thank you very much, Tim, and we wish you the best. Don't be a stranger, though. I heard it's about 115 in Texas right now. That's this morning. Yeah. All right, we're next on to our public comment section of the agenda. Do we have any public comment this morning on items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none from the room. Jen, anybody online want to comment?
If members of the board would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Veerkamp does not appear. There are any members of the public wishing to speak during our public comment period.
All right, thank you very much. We're on now to the communications section. General Manager.
Nothing to report.
All right, clerk of the board?
None today, thank you.
Any board members? No, seeing none. LAFCO has been dark. We'll meet again in September. So there's nothing to report there, so takes care of that. Now we're on to our consent calendar. We need an approval of that. Or a motion, please?
So I'll move that.
Thank you, Director Day. Director Osborne, second. All right, any comments or questions? Any from the room on the consent calendar? Seeing none. Jen, anybody online?
Members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Veerkamp, we do have a member of the public wishing to speak on the adoption of today's consent calendar, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Osborne.
All right.
I am calling to express my concern about agenda item, and I don't have the number in front of me, I'm sorry, but it's the one on declaring surplus land or
Consent calendar
surplus
item number
property.
2. Consent calendar item number 2.
Okay, we're 2. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
And last July, I spoke about my concerns about the deed, quitclaim deed, not containing the full legal description. It excluded the non-exclusive easement, and the documentation that was provided by General Counsel in the agenda packet says that they got the deed description from the assessor's office. Well, I get that. The description is correct, but they excluded the easement, which is important because that is what gives access to that property, and it also is what gives access to the lake. So I don't understand why General Counsel did not correct this quitclaim deed.
All right, thank you, ma'am, for that. Okay, any further, did you want to respond?
President Veerkamp, I mean, I don't have the authority to correct the county's title documents. So, moreover, to the extent that the legal description provided by the county recorder's office, to the extent that there's some sort of cloud on the title, as Ms. Issa is referring, we're trying to get rid of it. It doesn't, the direction from the board to me is to move forward with surplusing this property and conveying it to someone, potentially the owners within that area. So I don't think that there's any problem with the legal description as it relates to the district.
Okay.
Some folks out there don't want us to get rid of it. I get it.
Yes, Director Anzini.
So, out of curiosity, so what you're clearly saying is this is the county's problem, not ours. We only received the information from the county as it's written?
Yeah, the issue that Ms. Issa is referring to is that when the property was deeded to apparently Four Corners Landowners Association in 1996, the legal description described not just the boundaries of the parcel, but also a non-exclusive road easement. When the Four Corners Landowners Association quitclaimed that property back to the district, the legal description did not include a description of a non-exclusive road easement. Presumably, that's because the easement was distinguished when it was conveyed back to the owner of the road easement. In other words, there's no need for a property, an owner of an easement loses the easement when they acquire the property.
Thank you.
Yep. Director Day?
Yeah, and also, we're not making any judgments on that today. We're simply declaring it surplus.
That's correct.
All right. Any further comments or questions? Okay, we've got a motion and a second.
President
Yes.
Veerkamp, she has raised her hand again. Typically, we don't get into debates.
Yeah, we're not.
Would you it's your,
I don't believe so unless the board wants to. I don't think we're going to go back and forth, so the properties, the item is, as Director Dave pointed out, is to declare it surplus. What happens to it from here, we don't know yet, but, and whoever were to get it could work on that easement if they need it. That's the way I see it. All right?
ma'am, at the direction of the board, you've already had one opportunity to speak, so we are closing public comment for this item.
Okay, we're ready to vote on the consent calendar. Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. We are on to information items. Item 5, engineering. Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning. I am Tracy Eden Bishop, and the purpose of this agenda item is to review the water treatment plant conditions assessments and the results that are provided in the preliminary improvement recommendations. A lot of steps, so John. Okay, you can just go on to the slide. Okay, so back in 2019, the board approved a first phase of work for Corollo to prepare an asset management plan for the district's water treatment plants. The second phase was approved in 2021. And the board again approved the project in the 23-27 CIP. So given the age of the district's assets at the treatment plants, this project was initiated several years ago, and we do finally have a draft asset management plan that addresses our aging infrastructure, that will improve operational efficiency and help us to maintain regulatory compliance going forward. The asset management plan will provide that guide for the next 20 years as far as scheduling of the asset replacements and the cost of the asset replacements. As part of this presentation, I'll be going over the key outcomes of the plan and the preliminary improvements. As you know, across the water industry, there's been a lot of focus on aging assets lately because everything is getting to that point where it needs to be rehabilitated or replaced. Our water treatment plant infrastructure has not been evaluated in a holistic way until this project was initiated in 2019. And we now have a better understanding of the age and the condition of our assets at the treatment plants. So that allows us to better predict the timing and the cost of what that's going to take. This is a aerial photo of the El Dorado Hills treatment plant, and I've included it here just to give you an idea of the age of our infrastructure. And this is typical of our treatment plants. In 1960, the facilities in yellow were constructed. So, 70 years old? Not that long ago. So we're starting to see a lot of failures in those facilities. And then in 93, there was an upgrade. Some other regulatory compliance issues were addressed with that upgrade. So you can see that we have, and that's 30 years ago. So you can see that we have a lot of old stuff out there that needs to be rehabilitated. Thanks, Jen. So the draft asset management plan was developed by Corollo in a couple of phases. Phase 1 included preliminary visual condition assessments, detailed corrosion evaluations, treatment process evaluations, and a remaining useful life analysis. And the picture to the right there is just an example of some of the results of the corrosion study that was done at El Dorado Hills. Phase 2 included more comprehensive evaluations and assessments that were recommended by Phase 1. Some master planning at the treatment plants was included at El Dorado Hills and Reservoir 1. Project prioritization and timing was considered for each of the assets based on their age. Project costs were developed. And then finally, an asset management plan that kind of is the culmination of all of that work over the last 3 years. I guess it's 4 years now. It's been a while. So the district owns and operates 5 water treatment plants. El Dorado Hills treats water out of Folsom. Reservoir 1 treats water off of the South Fork of the American River. Reservoir A treats water from Sly Park. Strawberry, also South Fork of the American, way up on Highway 50 is a small treatment plant. Outingdale, which is in the South County in the Cosumnes River Basin. So 4 out of the 5 treatment plants were assessed. Outingdale was not assessed because it has newer upgrades and is in pretty good operating condition. So in total, 1,700 assets were analyzed, and 927 of them actually had eyes-on assessments in the field. So it's quite a comprehensive evaluation of the treatment plants. So the objective of the asset management plan is to provide a 20-year plan with budget estimates and an implementation schedule. And Carollo generated this information by answering these questions. What is the current state of the assets? What is the required level of service? What are the business risks involved if an asset fails? What are the best operations and capital investment strategies? And what's the best long-term funding strategy? And this approach is consistent with American Water Works Association asset management planning guidance. And the primary benefits are to extend infrastructure life, reduce overall capital expenditures, and phase the work to avoid failures. So current state of assets. The estimated useful life is the starting point for determining condition of our assets. This can be adjusted up or down. That initial estimated life is based on the manufacturer's recommendations. And it assumes certain operating conditions. But if you have a situation where you have a pump starting 2 times as often as the manufacturer thought it would, that would lower the estimated useful life. If you could no longer get parts, that would lower the estimated useful life. So there's a lot of factors in that.
Just a quick question, maybe observation. Can the remaining useful life be a negative number?
Yeah, that means it failed completely, so, yeah. Okay, so the remaining useful life is the next step in determining the condition of the asset and when it might need to be replaced. Carollo used a probability of failure model, so each asset was scored based on this probability of failure model, and I won't go into all the details of that. So the next slide shows the results of this analysis. So the chart on the left shows the probability of failure scores by treatment plant. And so each bar represents the treatment plants. And then the scoring is from good to failed. And this kind of goes to your question, Director Dwyer, what's failed? So failed is not necessarily it's not running anymore. It's that if you don't do something very quickly, immediately, that you're going to have a failure. And poor is that you need to do some upgrades to that asset. So just to give you kind of a frame of reference there. So you can see that we have a high percentage of poor and failed scores for our water treatment plant assets. And Reservoir 1 has the highest percentage of poor and failed scores. This chart on the right is the percent life consumed by the water treatment plants. So you can see that we're between 50 and 70% of life expired at our treatment plants. The next asset management plan framework question is what's the required level of service? And we used the district's guiding principles to develop project prioritization criteria. And those principles include fiscal responsibility, safety, customer service, and respect for the individual. And the key inputs into this project prioritization criteria were life cycle costs, increased resilience, and the risk mitigated by upgrading or rehabilitating an asset. So this score was not used to change the timing of the asset replacement or rehabilitation. It was only used to sequence projects during a single year of the plan. Next, business risk. So to understand the risk involved with the failure of an asset, a consequence of failure score was assigned to each asset, and that's defined as the relative impact to a facility if the asset failed or caused a process outage at the treatment plant. So there were individual scores assigned in the area of financial, social, environmental. And then finally, finally, the probability of failure and the consequence of failure scores were used to assign a risk category for each of the assets. So this is the result of that analysis. Again, we have a lot of high scores for consequence of failure at all of our treatment plants, but the highest percentage is at Reservoir 1. So then the next step is to plot that failure of, probability of failure score against the consequence of failure score. And if you have high scores in both categories, you end up in that very high risk category. And the rest of those are described there. So the chart on the right provides the distribution of these scores at the treatment plants. And again, you can see we do have a pretty high percentage at Reservoir 1, especially, of high consequence of failure, or of high risk category assets. The next step in the asset management plan framework was to develop an operations and capital investment strategy. And this includes addressing the longer-term needs at the plant and how they impact the shorter-term needs of the plant. So the idea here is that you wouldn't, if there was like an age-based trigger to replace a piece of equipment in year 5, but you had master planning projects coming on that would take care of that asset, you wouldn't spend the money in year 5, you would wait till year 7. So this was all incorporated, the master plans were incorporated with the age-based asset replacements. So we did do master plans, prepare master plans for El Dorado Hills and Res 1, because we knew that they would involve some pretty fundamental changes in treatment process at the treatment plants and comprehensive plant layouts that might affect other asset replacements in the near term. So at Res A and Strawberry, we did not do, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I fading in and out? Okay. So master plans were not prepared for Reservoir A and Strawberry because the improvements are just a lot more straightforward and didn't require master planning. So based on all of this analysis, the CIP that Carollo developed is presented in this chart. That's a pretty scary looking chart with all those expenditures early in the 20-year planning horizon. And most of them are attributed to the master planning projects. So the blue bars and the yellow bars are the El Dorado Hills Master Plan and Reservoir 1 Master Plan projects. So we recognize that, this is an ideal world, no fiscal constraints, but it does represent a baseline of what needs to be done at the treatment plants. Our challenge now is to try to figure out how to smooth that out, to make those expenditures a little bit more uniform over time, And we are working on that. And those changes will be reflected in the final asset management plan. Another consideration in refining the plan includes the ongoing water master plan effort. And that effort addresses other things than just the treatment plants. So we are currently reconciling the water master plan with the water treatment plant master plans because it could change the order of how the treatment plants are upgraded. The factors that we're considering are the high growth rates in El Dorado Hills relative to other areas in the district, relative cost of increasing transmission capacity versus treatment capacity, because all of our transmission mains run from east to west. And if you relied on Reservoir 1, for instance, for that new capacity you need in El Dorado Hills, then you'd be upgrading transmission mains as well as upgrading treatment plants. So that's all being worked out through this reconciliation between the master plans. So based on the high growth rate, the relative cost of transmission capacity, and just overall system reliability, we believe that the El Dorado Hills plant should be prioritized ahead of Reservoir 1, even though some of the results in asset management plan would make you think otherwise, that maybe Reservoir 1 is what needs to be the focus. So the next 4 slides are aerial views of the treatment plant with the proposed improvements, the 4 phases of improvements. So phase 1 would include a new wash water basin, relocating a plate settler, system, relocating the emergency generator and transformer. And this is basically to kind of get things out of the way for the next phase of work, which is phase 2 on the next slide. And this is the big hit, the $55 million hit. So this includes new flocculation and sedimentation basins, a new filter facility, and very expensive improvements, structural improvements. The next phase includes new gravity thickeners and pretty much a rework of all of the chemical systems and a new UV disinfection facility. And the final phase, this is when we actually get the capacity increase that we're looking for in El Dorado Hills to meet the demands. You can see we're adding additional sedimentation basins, additional filters, and upgrading the UV system for the final product. And all of this has to be contained on this very small site, so it's a very difficult site condition to work all this in. And these improvements are planned to be done over the next 10 years. So I won't go into all the detail
Tracy,
on...
I'm
Yes.
sorry, could you go back one slide? And I know that's down the road. Some of this is coming up fast. Makes me a little uncomfortable, but as far as this particular aspect of it, of the added capacity, as we get closer to it, I would say we want to be cautious, because EID in the past has been burned by adding capacity, and then things suddenly slow down, and we're stuck with all this excess capacity for years that then ratepayers have to pay for, when we thought it was going to have new ratepayers help us pay for it, and that doesn't pan out. So, and the state finance department released a study recently talking about population growth in California and population growth by county, and generally flat. We're aging is a big part of it, both in the state and in El Dorado County. But while some counties like Sacramento or Amador are projected to grow, El Dorado County is actually projected to stay flat and maybe shrink a little bit. And again, a lot of that has to do with age, and it will vary depending upon the location of the county. El Dorado Hills more likely to grow, up the hill maybe likely to shrink. But just all those factors we just have to be cautious and careful with.
of not getting too far. We need to stay ahead, but we don't want to get too far ahead.
Exactly. And the first 3 phases are really just to firm up the capacity that we already have at the plant, that the plant's rated for. It's this last phase that gives you that big bump. So that may be what gets pushed way out. Yeah. So this is a site layout of Res 1, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this and not go through the phases with you, but I just want to give you an idea of what it will look like, the differences in how the plant's being laid out, how it would be laid out in the future. So that's the finished product. And, you know, I said that we think that El Dorado Hills should go first, but that doesn't mean we're ignoring very pressing issues at Reservoir 1. You're actually going to be hearing an agenda item today for replacing Reservoir 1. The lining and covering is just coming apart. We are moving ahead with some of these projects, but it'll be very calculated and only doing what we need to do. And part of reconciling or finalizing the asset management plan will be to look at, you know, which of these processes actually need to be done, what could be deferred, where can we minimize cost. So we'll be spending some time on that as we finalize the asset management plan. Okay, the final asset management plan framework question involves a long-term funding strategy. So with this draft asset management plan, we have considered long-term regulatory compliance needs, process improvements, condition assessments, age-based project triggers, and the master planning alternatives that we've talked about. It identifies a capital need of $372 million over 20 years. And it does provide an implementation timing, but as I mentioned, we will be looking at pushing out some of those costs and minimizing costs. So in the final plan, there'll be some differences.
Tracy, if I could, and this is something that we can't control, but it's something I think when we're looking at a long-term strategy, which I think this is awesome, the numbers are mind-blowing. I know they'll probably get bigger, but and maybe some of the timelines are faster than I would be comfortable with. But 2 factors that I think when we're looking at it from a strategic standpoint of long-term, when talking about 5, 10, 15 years, is 2 variables as far as their costs are concerned are the cost of borrowing, because a lot of these might require borrowing. And while we can't predict the future, we do know historically it goes up and down. And if it's something can be, if interest rates are suddenly low, we might look at accelerating some things. If the interest rates continue to stay high, we might look at slowing it down a little bit. And then also the same thing with the construction economy. That can be very volatile. We're in a time of accelerating costs and tight, hard to get people to do jobs and that sort of stuff, but that changes. We've seen it over the last 20 years. It goes up and it goes down. And again, if we see the economy slowing and contractors are more aggressively bidding things, we might want to accelerate some of our projects versus some we might want to slow down a little bit if their things are like right now. So anyhow, just something for us to think about, for the board and for management, to keep that in the back of our head. We can't time it all always, but if we can, look at it.
Yeah. Great input. Thank you for that. Okay. The cost of service study does contemplate these improvements. Staff has included $89 million in phased expenditures for El Dorado Hills, and that's included in the financial plans to be funded over the next 5 years or so through bond issuances. So to your point about interest rates. Okay. So there's the list of projects that are being considered right now for the bond. So our next steps are to complete the Water Master Plan reconciliation with the draft asset management plan, CIP. Explore strategies to address Res 1 aging infrastructure and long-term master planning needs within the district's fiscal constraints, and to start incorporating these improvements into our CIP. So with that, are there any other questions?
Director Osborne.
I think I know the answer, but is there any potential for grant money out of the Clean Water Act or any of that kind of thing to offset some of these costs?
Yes, actually, for Reservoir 1, we have applied for a brick, is it a brick? It's a hazard mitigation.
I'm sorry, could you say
A
again?
hazard mitigation grant
Okay.
through FEMA. Because of the threat of wildfire near the treatment plant. So the reservoir that Kaylee will be talking about today with you at Res 1, the replacement of the reservoir.
Thank
So
you.
yes, we are aggressively looking for funding, grant funding. And
Okay, thank you.
Director Dwyer.
Yep, a great presentation. I think it's something that needed to be done about 30 years ago. So we're playing the catch-up mode. You know, every project that comes before us, the term, this asset is beyond its useful life and we need to replace it now. Had we done this in the past, we would have had a phased plan to replace assets before they're worn out. And I'm always concerned about the risk of failure, that there's other agencies and water districts, both in the U.S. and worldwide, that have gone down the same path, just deferring maintenance, in the false economy of trying to keep rates low. But then there is a major failure, and I think in South Africa, they ended up rationing water, turning water off to certain communities, kind of like the power companies are doing. And I just don't want to see us in that kind of a position. The other observation is you had a slide in there with timing. I think it was slide number 16 or page 16 that showed that the large capital requirement for the next 10 years, and then it drops off. And it's too bad, like Director Day said, we couldn't kind of smooth that big lump out. But on the one hand, you have the need, and the other hand, you have the risk. And I think we're just going to have to try to muddle through the
Yes.
best that we can. So, thank you.
Yes.
Good presentation.
thank you.
Director Ranzini.
Yeah, I like the presentation, and I have the same concerns as the board members. I think where we want to go with this, and you already talked about the FEMA grant, but it's really, there's a lot of construction happening right now and funding from several government agencies. And this is I'm just going to throw this out there. Sometimes staff is so working on the issue that they can't get outside that scope of creative ways of getting grants and applying. And it might be something to consider. This is, I've been on several boards. I've been on a school board. I've been on a city council. So it's still always the same. Staff doesn't have the capacity sometimes to reach out and find the more creative way of getting something done. AWWA and Aqua certainly have suggestions, but most of those suggestions that we've come through on this is always a big water company. It's not the small rural water companies. And it might behoove us to find a grant writer. I know that staff does that, and I'm not going to say that they're doing a horrible job. I'm just suggesting it's a good enhancement to have somebody outside the jurisdiction to look at the best way of us to get through this next 5 years. And quite frankly, we are really at a capacity that we have to do the infrastructure. Just me working on my irrigation system in my backyard has caused me distress with overwatering. So, because some pipe broke here or some little irrigation thing there, and we don't catch it all as individuals, but as a water district, We have lots of avenues, and I really want to encourage, I know, I'm not putting anybody's direction down, but I think it's really important that we pay attention to those little opportunities that are out there. We have a lobbyist, and I know he's doing his best, but sometimes we have to go outside that realm.
We, we're on the same page, staff and you.
Okay.
So we have actually contracted with Carollo to help us look at our CIP, or it's focused on water and wastewater, to look at our CIP and identify grant opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act and all this money that's pouring out of the federal government to try to capture, to seize those opportunities. So we actually do have a consultant working on it.
But Corolla does a lot of work for us.
They do, yes.
And so they might be in that same sphere.
I see.
Do you understand what
Yes,
I'm
I do.
saying?
I do.
Of not seeing the creativeness.
Yeah.
Outside perspective, that's exactly what I
Okay.
want.
We'll
General
do that.
Manager Abercrombie, I believe you have a comment?
Yeah, we have a draft job description prepared and ready to roll on that. I don't like hiring people until we get through the cost of service study and approvals. I mean, we have needs in distribution operators. I think there's an IT position. We had a list of positions we wanted to obtain staff for, and grant and asset management's one of those. So once that process is done, we'll be pursuing that.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah, great conversation. Topic is maybe not one we want to really welcome, but we have to. It's our responsibility. Look at Grizzly Flats Water District, wiped out by catastrophic wildfire, which is predictable in El Dorado County. I think our infrastructure is a little more protected, but you never know. So there may be opportunities for those grants or something outside the box. All right, with that, Tracy, thank you very much. We'll now entertain any comment from the public. Seeing none in the room. Jen, is anybody online wishing to talk on this information item only?
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is the public comment period for information item number 5. No action will be taken. If you would like to speak and you're participating via computer, just hover down to the bottom of your screen and click that raise your hand button. It will notify us on this end and we will allow you to speak. If you're participating through your phone, you press your your star 9 button to raise your hand, and it will notify us here on this end. President Verkamp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 5.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Tracy. We will now move on to our action items, and action item 6 is finance, which I'm going to be recusing myself. There's a payment to my brother's company, which I do not have any financial tie to, but I think it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Director Day at this time.
All right, item number 6, we're going to ratify our warrant registers. Do I hear a motion? I move. A
I'll
motion.
move it, but I have a question.
Well, do you want to second it? And Director Anzini beat you on the first
Oh, I'm
motion.
sorry, that's fine.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Well, I'm just curious, as alluded to this last board meeting, but the cost of materials has dramatically just gone crazy. And I just wondered if somebody off the top of their head has like for Ferguson Enterprises, $33,000 plus for copper pipe and tubing and tees. What percentage increase? I think people need to understand that we have to do this stuff, but we have to pay for it. And I mean, I've just, on my own personal thing, I just did a little construction job, and what 4 years ago, when a piece of siding was $38, I just paid $80 for it. And it's just crazy. But I just wondered, anybody have any percentage idea of what these parts and pieces and parts are going up? I mean, it's insane.
I think the official answer is a lot.
Supply and demand.
I don't see anybody jumping up, George, so.
Perfect answer.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, I have a motion and a second. Do we have any public comment on item 6?
If members of the board would like to, members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 6, option 1, moved by Director Anzini, seconded by Director Osborne, with Director Veerkamp recusing himself. Now is the time. Vice President Day, does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
We're now on to item 7. For the same reasons as item 6, I will be recusing myself on this item also. So Director Day, if you would take it, please.
Yep. All right, item 7, we have a presentation.
Hello, my name is Madeline Kelsch. I'm a civil associate engineer.
You're going to have to speak up.
All right. My name is Madeline Kelsch. I'm a civil associate engineer. I'm going to be talking about the Sly Park Day Use Area Stabilization Project, construction contract and project funding. Next slide. So previous board actions for this project, in May of last year, the board approved additional funding in the amount of $35,000 for capitalized labor for the project. This was to wrap up design, and then in November of last year, the board adopted the 2023-2027 CIP, which included this project. So for a summary of the issue, the day use area near the Jenkinson Lake main boat ramp launch in the Sly Park area has experienced erosion over the years, threatening the stability of the banks, and installation of rock slope protection along the shoreline is required to prevent further erosion along the shoreline. So for the project background, this is where the area is along Sly Park Lake. You can see highlighted there the main boat ramp, and then for the 300 feet of shoreline next to, on the left of that, the boat ramp is where the project will be taking place. And this is an image showing the erosion that's occurring there. So the boat ramp is right to the left of this photo, and what happens is from wind or either boats approaching and leaving the boat ramp, waves are caused, which pull out the soil from the roots and create this erosion here. Next slide. And this is just another image showing the erosion that's taken place. And as you can see up at the top, there's picnic tables and grills. So this is a day use area, but over the past couple of years, it's had to been blocked off due to safety concerns with the stability of the shore. So what we're proposing is installing both geotextile and riprap along the shoreline that will help dissipate the waves and prevent farther erosion of the shoreline. And these are just images of what that might look like. It's commonly used along shorelines. So the scope of the work for the project is fairly simple. It's about 300 feet of slope and shoreline stabilization, including clearing trees and shrubs, grading the slope, and then placing the slope protection, which consists of geotextile or like pinned fabric, and then riprap. So the district bid this project in July. We received 2 bids in the beginning of August. The bidders are up on the screen. However, as you'll note, one of the contractors was determined to be non-responsive and non-responsible based on several factors. And so Doug Veerkamp General Engineering was the lowest responsible and responsive bid, and staff is recommending the award of the contract to Veerkamp. You'll also note the engineer's estimate for the project was $291,000, and Veerkamp's bid came in just under that. So the anticipated schedule for the project, following a board award, we would do project submittals in the beginning of September, and then the project would be constructed September through October. I will note that the project is dependent on the lake levels because it's within the ordinary high water mark of Jenkinson Lake, and therefore it can only be completed after the lake levels drop sufficiently. We are expecting those to drop to sufficient levels within the next 2 weeks. Environmental review for the project. This project is considered exempt from CEQA because it's considered repair of existing facilities. Staff filed a notice of exemption from CEQA on December 17th, 2021, when the project was completing design. So funding for the project, we're requesting Award of the contract for $286,990, and then additional funding also for construction engineering services, on-call specialty inspection services, the capitalized labor, which includes project management, environmental compliance and inspection, and then project contingency. So the board options for this project, option one is to award the contract to Doug Veerkamp General Engineering for $286,990 for construction of the Sly Park Day Use Area Stabilization Project, and then also authorize additional funding for construction engineering services, specialty inspection, capitalized labor. Oh, each one, great. Authorize additional funding of $8,000 for construction engineering services, $2,900 for specialty inspection, $54,000 for capitalized labor, and $35,189 in contingencies for a total funding request of $387,079 for the Sly Park Day Use Area Stabilization Project, which staff has determined is exempt from CEQA. And staff recommends option one.
I'll move option one.
I'll second it. I have just a term, geotextile, what, that's a term I have never heard before. Could you enlighten me?
Absolutely. It's essentially a fabric. It is like waterproof in nature, but it's pinned to the slope to prevent erosion, and then the rocks are placed on top of that.
Okay,
Waterproof, or is it, so it's not permeable?
No.
Interesting, okay.
thank you.
What's the life of that material?
I'm not sure.
5 years?
Oh, longer than 5 years. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. The rocks hopefully will last a while. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on item 7?
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. For action item number 7, option 1 moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Osborne, with Director Veerkamp recusing himself. Vice President Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on this item. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay, please vote. And while we're voting, unfortunately, we're a litigious society. We may want to post some signs up and say, caution, slippery rocks, don't walk on, just because.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director Day. We will now move on to item 8, engineering. DeLongchamp, yep. Good morning.
And a good morning to you.
Never mind.
Siri is speaking to you.
Wow. These things have a mind of their own.
Old folks with cell phones.
If Siri wants to do my presentation for me, I'm okay with that.
I'll ask, no, I'm not going to ask her.
All right, my name is Kaylee DeLongchamp. I'm an associate engineer here at the district, and I am here to talk about our Reservoir 1 and Pollock Pines Reservoir Replacement Project. So some previous board action. Back in November of last year, the board adopted the 2023-2027 CIP, and this did include a storage tank and replacement and rehabilitation programmatic CIP, and that included the replacement of Reservoir 1. So summary of the issue, the district currently owns and operates 7 floating covers within its system. These floating covers have exceeded their useful life and are in need of replacement. These covers are also prone to leaks and vulnerable to wildfires. So this picture is actually of one of our more recent leaks on a Reservoir 1 floating cover. So I circled the 2 leaks there on the picture. So this project will replace 2 of the district's floating covers, the Reservoir 1 floating cover and the Pollock Pines Reservoir floating cover. So both of these reservoirs were built in the early 60s, and they were built as unlined and uncovered reservoirs. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, we added hypalon liners and covers to each of the facilities. Currently, the Pollock Pines Reservoir does have a 10-gallon per minute leak, which is what's pictured there. It has an underdrain system underneath the reservoir, and so that's the leak coming out of the underdrain system. We have made many attempts to try and repair this leak, but have yet been unsuccessful as of yet. Next slide. So both these reservoirs are located in Pollock Pines, and this is kind of to help you orient yourself with where they're located in regards to Highway 50 and the Fort Bay Reservoir. So Reservoir 1 is located at the Reservoir 1 water treatment plant. It is both the chlorine contact reservoir for that plant as well as diurnal storage for the Pollock Pines and Camino service areas. So water from that is then pumped up to the Pollock Pines Reservoir, and that then serves additional areas of the Pollock Pines service area. So each of these reservoirs will be replaced with 2 concrete tanks. So these are some pictures of the reservoirs. At the top, we have our Reservoir 1, and on the bottom, Pollock Pines Reservoir. So we do have several existing concrete tanks and reservoirs in our system, and this is a couple of pictures. One is our Reservoir A reservoir, which is at our Reservoir A water treatment plant, and then we also have a couple concrete tanks at our Reservoir 12 site. As a side note, once this project is complete, all of the floating covers in Pollock Pines will have been replaced. So this contract is for the basis of design report. So this will do a location alternatives analysis. It'll do a hydraulics analysis, geotechnical analysis, topographic survey, as well as define some of the constructability parameters, such as whether or not we need temporary storage at the sites for construction, where we'll do laydown and staging for each of the sites, and then as well as determine if temporary pumping is needed. Once this is all complete, we'll actually have a 10% level of design site plan for each of the sites. So the district released a request for proposals in July of this year and received 3 proposals. All of the proposals were reviewed on criteria established in the RFP. This included experience and expertise, demonstrated understanding of site constraints, project approach, past performance record, references, and cost. Staff recommends award to Carollo Engineers due to their experienced team, appropriate staffing and billing rates, and relevant project experience.
Could you go back that one slide, please? And Jack, kind of discuss Waterworks, why we're not going with the low bidder if they're qualified and responsive.
I can. So Carollo, one of the things that stood out with their proposal is that they are assigning some of their more senior staff to this project. So that is why it's slightly more expensive than Waterworks, and that senior staff will be of real benefit to the district on this project. In addition, they're very familiar with the site location. They're currently working on the district's water master plan. They completed the Res 1 water treatment plant master plan. And they demonstrate a real thorough understanding of the project, including the development of potential project layouts in their RFP that they've submitted. And then they also have submitted on several team members that were just well and above what other consultants put forth. And this included both a constructability expert and a cost estimating expert. So for that additional amount, it was worth it.
Okay, thank you.
So in August of this year, we submitted an application to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So Pollock Pines is considered a socially vulnerable community, which qualifies it for a 75 to 100% reimbursement. And this would include both design and construction. And we're seeing design and construction costs probably around $17 to $20 million. So 75 to 100% reimbursement would be well needed for this. However, this does not include our BODR. The BODR will be out of the capital improvement plan and not funded by FEMA. So as I mentioned, floating covers are vulnerable to wildfire. This photo is actually of Paradise Irrigation District's floating cover that burned during the campfire. And then the next slide is a bigger picture of that burned area. So this is why we want to replace our floating covers so that we can ensure reliability for our customers. So this BODR will be completed by early of next year. Following that, we'll go into design, with design anticipated to be complete in 2025 and construction to start in 2026. Funding requirements, we need funding for the contract as well as for capitalized labor, which includes operations staff, coordination, project management, and environmental review, and a contingency of 10%. So board options. Option 1, award a contract to Carollo Engineers in the not-to-exceed amount of $146,425 to prepare a basis of design report and authorize additional funding of $45,000 for capitalized labor and $20,000 in contingencies, for a total funding request of $211,425 for the Reservoir 1 and Pollock Pines Reservoir Replacement Project, project number 23009.01.
Move one.
We have a motion, do we have a
I'll
second?
second it.
We have a second, Director Anzini, thank you. Any further comments or questions? Director Osborne?
I've been getting inquiries about, and this is nothing new, about the odor of chlorine. And I know I've explained to people that because of the impact of the Caldor fire, we've had to increase the level of chlorine. This has been my standard answer. But at any rate, can I express to people that by doing this project, we might be able to mitigate that? Is that going to be any potential?
I'll answer a little bit of that.
Kurt?
Thanks, Kaylee. Kurt Nicola, Water Operations Maintenance Supervisor. Good afternoon, good morning. A lot of times the smell that we get is actually because of lower chlorine in the reaction. We're really low on chlorine throughout our entire system, and those dead ends are where we're actually experiencing an off-gassing that we smell and contribute to the chlorine. So sure, you can tell them that.
Okay.
I have a question.
I think
Please.
Dan's gonna polish it up a little bit, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
Supervisor Anzini.
after, I'm sorry.
Director Anzini, did you-
yes, I've heard those complaints from maybe residents, not only in Cameron Park, but over into the Serrano area. That's another complaint, but I have kind of we went through this a couple years ago during the summertime, when people go on extended vacations, the water stays in, maybe I'm wrong, it makes a good sense, it shuts them up. Anyway, that the water stays in the pipes, and those people who are gone, it backs up and it kind of solidifies. So I tell them to run the water for a little while, and the taste will, of course, we sell more water that way, but, but it does go away.
Yeah, good morning, Dan Corcoran, Operations Director. So
Right.
it's always a good idea to have people, fresh water at your tap, of course. But I think as the boards, we've advised the board over several past years, the chlorine residual within the water system is something we're managing very closely because it's of that disinfection byproduct that we've talked about. Historically, the district did have higher chlorine residuals, but as the regulatory framework has developed, we have to continue to lower those. And so as Kurt was describing to you, that we are on that very low threshold. We have just enough chlorine to ensure the water remains safe to drink, but that we don't have, that we're be careful that we don't have that off-gassing. And that off-gassing is typical. Water's been in your pipe for a day or two at the end of a line, but it's not anything to be concerned about at all. I assure you that our ongoing monitoring of the system, that we do have that.
I've quantified to say to make sure that the water is very safe to drink, and that's the.
Absolutely. And in terms of the specific, your question, Director Osborne, the type of reservoir that we have in the future will not necessarily have a correlation to the chlorine residual, because we are managing already as low as possible. However, as Kaylee is describing, it's much more secure. Now, as you know, we spend over almost $200,000 a year cleaning and and repairing these overage covers that are beyond their remaining useful life, as Director Dwyer articulated. So, and I think this is an opportunity, wasn't planning to do this, but after 33 years, Kurt's actually retiring. So as you can tell, that was a great comment from somebody that's going to retire after this program. So, I want to thank Kurt for his great positive attitude. As always, great joker, a great guy. But anyway, so I just want to make sure we answer your question as completely as possible for the sure of the public. So.
All right, any further questions or comments?
President Veerkamp,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to encourage board members, and if all else fails, you can just have them call the district, and we have people better qualified to maybe answer their specific questions. And so I'm just encouraging you to.
They elect us to know all of this stuff, and we don't.
Well,
There's no way
you
possible.
you have to remind them that you are a generalist, not an expert, and you
Policy
want to give them to the
makers.
expert so they could answer the question expertly.
I disagree.
Just like Kurt.
Yeah, just like Kurt, we got to make sure we get. All right, thank you, Jen, for that. I think we're ready to vote. We have a motion and a second. All those in
After
favor?
we call public
Oh,
comment.
yeah, we better do that. Public comment. Any public
If-
in this room want to speak on this item? Seeing none, how about online, Jen?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 8, option 1, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Anzini, now is the time for that. President Veerkamp, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on action item number 8.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, we are through our regular agenda. We're ready for closed session agenda where we have items A, B, and C. Council, do anything that you have to comment on, or we'll have to call for public comment as well?
Now, President Veerkamp, I anticipate that the board's consideration of closed session items A, B, and C will require at least 40 minutes.
All right, very good. Do we have any public comment on any of those items? Seeing none, we are,
For the purposes of this Zoom session, we will be shutting down this Zoom session. The board will not report back prior to 10 minutes to 11. However, it could be later.
all right, we will recess to closed session.
I don't want to hear it.
Let the record reflect that we've returned from closed session and we do have reportable action. We'll refer to council to do that.
Thank you, President Veerkamp. On closed session matters A and C, the board provided direction to staff but took no reportable action. On closed session item B, on a unanimous motion by Director Osborne, seconded by Director Day, the board approved the purchase of the property located at Pony Express Trail with assessor's parcel number 076280001 for the purchase price of $108,000 and authorize the general manager to approve all necessary and associated closing and escrow costs and execute all documents necessary to complete the transaction. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you very much. A review of assignments.
None today
All right, and we are adjourned.
at 10:54 a.m.
Thank you very much, everybody.